Blessings and welcome back, everyone. I'm astrologer Elsa Wadsworth. Here with me today is a very special and honored guest, Christopher Warnock. Thank you so much for being here, Christopher.
Wow, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So this interview actually came about recently. We had a viewer ask if we could talk a little bit more about our thoughts on the Picatrix. And I thought before we gave our novice answers that I would reach out to Chris to just see if Christopher could come and give us a better foundation. So I was like, I'll reach out to the expert, just see. And so Christopher Warnock has graced us all today with this foundational interview on the topic. So we'll talk a little bit about the Picatrix and some of your other books. So everyone sit back, relax, and enjoy as we dive into the topic. So for those of you, I'm sure everybody knows Christopher Warnock, but Christopher is the translation author of the Picatrix along with John Michael Greer, and is a practicing astrologer, mage, and celestial priest. So we can go ahead and dive right in. I figured I could spend, a few 5 minutes in the beginning just getting people acquainted with your beginnings, which you cover really beautifully. One of my new favorite books is the one that you just put out, The Celestial Way. And you cover a little bit of your history in the book, but how did you get your beginnings or professional history in astrology and the occult? Like, what brought you there? Anything you can say as far as that?
It's funny because I started off in a super suburban background. And I was a quote agnostic, in other words, and that's essentially somebody who's in the modern way of looking at things, which is that nothing exists except matter and energy. And that's what everybody does. If you go to the New York Times, go to the National Science Foundation, whatever, that's what they're going to tell you. And there's nothing spiritual. Or in other words, spiritual means psychological, and psychological is brain chemistry, and brain chemistry is, molecules and atoms, and it's subatomic particles bumping together. That's what reality is. And so you talk about angels metaphorically, symbolically, but they're not real. Okay. We need to get that straight with everybody, but we'll allow you to, if you want to play out on your own, that's okay. But if you come down to reality, that's what reality is. So that's the kind of the background that everybody's coming from. Everyone that comes to in the modern period, that comes to anything esoteric or spiritual or whatever, is coming out of that as their sort of bedrock. That's reality. And so most people get about maybe a third out of it, halfway out of it, but it's very hard to get people to dip their toes in the water of the authenticity of the spiritual. So that's the trajectory that my life took. Basically, like I said, I started out as an agnostic, and then I went to college. I went to college in Scotland at the University of St. Andrews, and then graduated from there. And then I went to law school. And then when I graduated from law school, I was in Washington, D.C., and I just sort of spontaneously became a spiritual seeker. And the spiritual seeker is like, it's the buffet style. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. We have an era where there's so many things that are available to us, and I got interested in a lot of different things. And as I was looking at various things, I stumbled across modern astrology. And that's what people usually think of as astrology. And when it's like saying cooking, what kind of cooking do you like? I like cooking. No, what kind of cooking? No, what cooking? Tacos, enchiladas. You mean Tex-Mex? No, cooking. So
Yeah.
that's the typical way that people approach astrology, because there's lots of different approaches and lots of different schools. And so I was reading, I looked at like Dane Rudyard, Liz Green, that sort of stuff. So the psychological natal stuff. So interesting, but I thought, I don't know, it didn't quite have it for you. Then I stumbled across horary. And so horary is basically medieval Renaissance. And it looks at the chart of a question, and it's very, very much for prediction. It's very, very precise and very accurate. So I'm like, yeah, this is what I really thought this is really cool. So I did the horary with Lee Lehman. She was my teacher. She's still teaching, great teacher. And then I started looking at what's called electional astrology. Now, electional astrology is kind of like the sister of horary, because it picks times to do things. So if you want to get married, if you asked a question at a certain time that had good indications for like a yes answer, that would also be a good time to do an election. So that's kind of this, they're very much sort of symbiotic or mirrors of each other. And then what I got interested in was talismans, because you have to use electional astrology to make talismans. So you have to pick an astrologically appropriate time. You have to elect a chart to make the talismans. And so that was kind of my trajectory into the astrological magic. And at the time, this is like 1997, 1998, no other, medieval Renaissance astrologer wanted to touch it. It was like, it was making magic is like, makes you look bad. It's not scientific. I mean, we want to be scientific, science and religion are coming together, blah, blah, blah. And so magic is just like, so, but I'm like, no, I want to do this. I want to actually make talismans. So what I did was I looked at the traditional sources and I said, okay, here's the instructions, but we've kind of only got the skeleton of it. So you take what the source says, then you take your knowledge of medieval Renaissance astrology in general. There's a lot of basic techniques. You plug the source into it, and then you kind of have to reconstruct stuff. You have to add some things in or take some things out. And what I basically created was a sort of infrastructure for doing talismanic elections. So what I sort of came up with was that you want to look for factors that maximize the strength, avoid the factors that are negative, but you have to be reasonable about it. If you have 50 factors that have to be in the chart and 50 factors that can't be in the chart, you're never going to be able to find a chart to make anything. On the other hand, if you have one factor, if you just say do moon, waning or waxing or whatever, then that's not a very strong election. So you've got to kind of get this balance between having enough factors to make it a strong election and then having so many factors in election, it's not possible to find it. And so where you come down in that is going to be a matter of preference, but you basically have to do that. So I set up sort of the infrastructure for that. And then I started looking around. Picatrix was very key. This was the text that was used by medieval Renaissance astrologers and astrological magicians. It's their basic sort of Bible, so to speak. And it was only available in Latin or Arabic. And so I started looking around to find somebody who could help translate it. And John Michael Greer, and he did about 75% of the translation. I did about 25%. I did all the astrological passages. So my Latin is terrible, but I can look at the astrological stuff and say what that is. And you need a professional astrologer to do that. You need somebody who really understands it in order to do it. Otherwise, it just gets garbled. And so that was important too. So getting Picatrix out there. Now, the thing about Picatrix is it's very advanced. It's written in about 1000 AD, translated into Latin in 1256. So it's medieval. It also assumes a lot of knowledge of medieval Renaissance astrology. So it's not like you can just pick it up and start making talismans. But the bigger problem is, even beyond technical, is that the way of thinking, that the worldview and the philosophy is very foreign to modern people. So it just doesn't make any sense to people. And so those are sort of problems. So my astrological magic course, for example, it takes, I don't know, maybe a year or so to do the course. It's all an introduction to Picatrix. It's all how to use Picatrix. And you need all that background in order to get yourself up to speed, how to think like a traditional person, and then how to learn all the technical stuff that you need to learn that. And then, getting beyond, it's like carpentry. Carpentry is hard. You couldn't learn from a book, right? You couldn't learn it by watching YouTube videos. You got to dive in and actually start working with it. And that's part of the thing about astrological magic or horary or whatever you're doing, is that it takes a lot of practice. And so that's kind of I gave a lot of this little fire hose of information there, but that's essentially how I got from, like I said, from being, I don't know anything about astrology, to now I'm kind of like, I'm one of the nice thing about astrological magic is when I started, I was only one. Now there's tons of people doing it. It's awesome. And people doing all sorts of different stuff. I mean, I have a way of doing it, but there's there's 50 different valid ways of doing it. And that's probably one of my most important messages right now, is that there's a lot of ways to do this. And so the key is to understand what your worldview is and then what your models are, because that's decides, because people come to me and say, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, that's the way you do it from a modern perspective. And they think they came up with it on their own. The same thing with me. I mean, I didn't come up with this stuff. I'm basically reflecting the worldview and the models and the sources that I have, and manifesting that. So, but that's the key, is that sort of self-knowledge. And then the recognition, a lot of stuff's just preference. The way I do it, there's not just one way to do stuff. And if you don't do it that way, your head will explode. And I get a lot of that. I see a lot of that on social media, or people come to me and they've gotten very frightened about stuff because somebody decided to say X was bad, and or you can't do Y, and then they got all freaked out about it. And it's like, no, there's different ways of doing it, and there's different pluses and minuses of how you do stuff. So, but that's what I would say, is that, the Picatrix is a great start if you're really serious about it, and then you can branch off, and there's all sorts of different ways that you can adapt it and use it into your own thing. And what I'm trying to do is start to provide this sort of stream of the sort of traditional methodology, right? It's a bit like, the Juilliard school. Someone said that to me about music. It's like, go to Juilliard and you're going to learn all this incredible technique and history, and you're going to do a lot of playing in that particular style, which isn't to say that's the only way to play music, right? But nevertheless, it's a great base for going off and doing other stuff. Once you have that depth of technical knowledge and you have that expertise and you've learned from those teachers, you have an excellent base to jump off to do that, or not. And you just want to pick up the guitar and play it yourself. That's valid too. So that's what I would say I'm trying to do. Plus, I teach, and so I've started up a lineage of my own, and so that I'm assuming that some of my students will teach, and it'll start passing it on and following that style. But that's what that's there for. Not to be the only way or the right way or the best way, but just to be an available resource for people, that people can follow it closely, or people can jump off and do their own variations of it as they please.
I mean, that's what I appreciate so much of your work. I mean, your work is paramount to the field, like you said, and I don't want to just parrot what you said, but like, you were the first doing this, and not to take you out of your seat of humility here, but like, you do have so much of that experience. And I think when you come forward always saying on your videos and when you do lectures that my way is this way, but it's not the only way, I think it's a really beautiful message as a mage, as a person in the space, to say that we can create around these things. But I too, when I study things, yoga, Sanskrit, Hellenistic astrology, medieval astrology, I find that as I work the system and get acquainted with that deeper methodology, it actually blossoms in me where I can add my personal spice or my personal view or something like that. So I really appreciate that about your message and about your teaching. And I think it gives a lot to us. So you recently, earlier this year, came out with the Celestial Way, the spiritual path of the stars and the planets, which was incredible. But what I found really interesting is the part, I mean, I love the whole book, but you speak about the Sabians of Haran. Can you speak a little bit about their contribution, their Hellenistic roots, how they brought that with them? You say that they talked about their prophet being Hermes Trismegistus. This was just huge inspiration for me. So do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, the Sabians of Haran are a really interesting. Haran is in like northern Syria, southern Turkey. I think it's now actually in Turkey, but it was a city that thousands of years old. I mean, and back to the Babylonians and Chaldeans and Sumerians and everything. And it was renowned as the city of the temple of the moon god Sin. And so it had this moon temple. So I mean, in when you get into the the later, like the classical period, and they basically stayed pagan, so to speak. I mean, they didn't convert to Christianity, and then they didn't become Muslim either. And so it looks like they had this sort of astrally based religion, so that they had this religion that was based around the planets and stars. And then there was a heavy infusion of Hermetic philosophy in that as well. So they served as a conduit for a lot of this really interesting esoteric stuff. And book 3, chapter 7 of Picatrix includes a whole bunch of planetary invocations that are attributed to the Haranian Sabians. And those are like the basis that we use for astrological magic. I mean, before we translate Picatrix, I didn't have anything to use, from a traditional source. And that's got, it's like, I mean, they're long. I mean, I had to kind of slim them down for the shorter stuff. So, but just, they had a tremendous influence in terms of philosophy, magic, astrology, other sciences and things like that. So, they provided a way, they synthesized material and then also were a conduit for passing it on. Picatrix, like I said, looks to be influenced by them. But I was just reading about the Ikhwan al-Safa, which was this Ismaili group that put together this encyclopedia, the epistles, that has all this sort of philosophical and interesting stuff in it, and their influence on the Picatrix. I was reading about the Picatrix's influence on, so it's really a lot of sort of esoteric strands come together with this Haranian Sabians. And so it's really a privilege, when I think about it. You have these periods of translation they were involved with, basically at this is about like say 800 to 1000 AD. We have the fall of the Roman Empire in the West in say 400 to 500 AD. So the civilization basically kind of collapses. And so you have, obviously people living there, but they're living at a less sophisticated level. They're not doing mathematics that you'd need for astrology. And so that's picked up by the Byzantines, and then it passes into the advanced Islamic civilization. So at that time period, like I said, 800 to 1000 AD, the Islamic civilization of the Middle East was the most sophisticated. And so there's this huge translation project of translating all the sort of Greek material, Latin material into Arabic, also Indian and Persian stuff too. And they create this new synthesis of Persian astrology, Hellenistic, a little bit of Vedic, to the what we consider to be medieval Renaissance. I mean, if you look at Lilly or any of our European, they're all doing, and same thing with my technique, it's very much this Arabic astrology. And so the Sabians were an important part of that, the whole process. And we have a translation process that's going on right now. All the stuff that's been in whatever language is going into English. I mean, luckily, as Americans, we speak English, so we can read the stuff, but it's everybody's second language, basically. And we'll see what happens with Chinese. But this is going on right now. We're in a hermetic or esoteric renaissance as well, where the tremendous amount of stuff is being translated and practiced and everything like that openly. So that's, every so often these things come along, like the Renaissance itself has a great hermetic and esoteric quality to it. It's almost like the yeast in the batch, and it causes this incredible growth and ferment and everything like that. And so the esoteric stuff, and then it goes underground. It gets persecuted, or it gets, out of style, and then it seems to disappear, but it just sort of becomes less noticeable in the culture, and then it pops back up again another 300 years. That's been sort of the pattern. So the Iranian Sabians were an important part of that, and so Picatrix is as well in that process, which is, I guess, very heavily influenced by them. I have a book by Thabit ibn Qurra, who was a Iranian Sabian, which is under the title of Astral High Magic, which is a book called Ad Imaginibus on Images. And it's mostly about house-based talismans. But Thabit ibn Qurra was probably one of the most famous Iranian Sabian astrologer, mages, scientists, philosophers, whatever you want to call them. So yeah, very important part of that whole esoteric, strand of Western, culture.
Yeah, really. And I feel blessed to be a part of the current Renaissance that we're in. And I mean, it's because of people like you translating, and John Michael Greer, and people translating things like the Picatrix or Ben Dykes doing amazing works on the later era, or all the Arabic authors actually. But it's really beautiful that we have all this. Like for myself coming into it at the time, I have so many translations at my fingertips, and I just really want to remind people that we didn't necessarily have this 20 years ago. Like, we're in a really beautiful moment with it right now.
Yeah. I mean, Ben Dykes has done an amazing job. I have his Guido Bonatti translation of Liber Astronomia, which is kind of the basic text for like medieval and 17th century astrologers like Lilly. And it's great. I mean, if I have a question, I'm going to look at, say, Christian astrology, and then, Liber Astronomia, Guido Bonatti as being the main sources for figuring stuff out. Like if I get stuck, or I'm like, I don't remember how to do this, or, what do they say about it? Those are key sources. But then Ben's gone ahead and done all this Arabic stuff. And you have this process, like I said, 800 to 1000, they're sort of creating this new astrology, and it's super complex and super sophisticated. And there's a process of sort of simplifying it to get to medieval, and then a further simplification to get to the sort of Renaissance, to the 17th century stuff. I mean, even then, that's way more complex than the modern stuff. But so people are just now, I have a student, Michael Beeson, who's doing all this natal stuff using the Arabic. He took Ben Dykes, just started doing a course, and only a few people have been through the course. It goes into incredible detail,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and so that's really cool. And Ben is in the Robert Zoller natal lineage. Robert Zoller did a lot of work with Guido Bonatti. And so that's the lineage that he's following on. But that's the complexity of the technique is really incredible. And that's like they're able to do natal timing. I've never been able to accurately do natal timing with the techniques that were available, or and so they're starting to do that on a much more serious level. And so I think it's really, like I said, there's a lot. The problem with this thing with the Ben Dykes translation, you can see my bookshelf behind me. I have a bunch of translations of it, but it's like, that's a couple lifetimes to actually do the stuff. And the typical thing that people do is they rush out and they buy the book, and they used to put it on their shelf. Now they just download it. So you open up, your Kindle or your computer, and you've got 50,000 PDFs on it, and then you rush off to the next one. Because what people are looking for is secrets, right? And a secret is like a magic word, right? Like abracadabra or whatever. And then once you know the secret, then, oh, boom, everything's revealed to you. Or once you read this book, everything's simple and everything's easy. And it's like, instead, what you've got is, it's a bit like getting the instruction manual, for your car, right? And never actually getting in the car, right? If you don't use it, if you don't work with it, then it's not getting. But like, for example, all these translations for astrological magic, you don't even need it. 3 books of occult philosophy has been openly available since, whatever, it was written in the 16th century. It's right out there, not that hard to get. Everything you need is there. But people they'll zip through it and like, oh, I read that, I went on to something new. And it's like, it's not about secrets, it's their arcana, so to speak. They're hidden in open view. And part of the problem, like I said, is a worldview. And if you're coming at this from the unconscious atheistic materialism, where your unconscious assumption is that it's all, magnetism. I mean, I know a lot of people that think astrology is magnetism.
Yeah.
They honestly think that's what the causality is. And so they can't understand what the scientist's problem is with it. Well, it's like, because there is no scientific causality for astrology. And so that's a big problem for people. Or what they do is they say energy. Well, it's not physical energy, electromagnetic energy, it's spiritual energy. But that's their whole conception of how it works. And that is really crippling in terms of doing magic or doing astrology. If you're going at it from the view that unconsciously it doesn't even work, it's not even real, and yet you're trying to still do the astrology and magic, it's always a problem. So a good test for that is the sidereal zodiac. If that sounds like, if that makes sense to you, if that's the obvious one to use in the tropicals for idiots, and sidereal zodiac is the right one, you are an unconscious atheistic materialist, because the thought process is that the sidereal zodiac is closer to the real material stars. Well, it actually isn't. There's something called the constellational zodiac, which is trying to actually look at the constellations, which is all, so some of them are like 45 degrees and others are like 3 degrees.
Yeah.
Very confusing. But if that intuitively makes sense to you, then you're coming from an atheistic materialistic standpoint, which is not bad. It doesn't mean you're evil, because people say I'll say you're an atheistic materialist. They're like, no, I'm not. Like, you're not a communist or whatever. It's just that's how you see reality. And so it doesn't make the tropical zodiac. I mean, the tropical zodiac is oriented to the seasons. It's totally natural. I mean, there's an incredible symmetry to the idea that the sun enters Aries at the first day of spring, which is the equinox, and day and night are, equal at that point. Goes into Cancer at the summer solstice, when the sun quits going to the north and stops and starts moving backwards. It's the longest day of the year. Autumnal equinox is when the sun goes into Libra. That's also equal day and night. And then the winter solstice is when the shortest day, or approximately around the shortest day. I mean, that's a very logical, coherent, natural cycle, but it doesn't correspond to the real stars, the material stars. And it must be. Astrology must come from matter. There's kind of energy coming out of it. That's how it works. That's how it works. And that's what's going on. And that's why you should use the sidereal zodiac. So I've only had 10,000 people. I have a web page on it. And I just say, here, take a look at the web page that goes into that worldview stuff. But this is the biggest stumbling block for people. And, it's hard, though, because you're talking about reality. I mean, reality is reality. I mean, there's no way of, this worldview doesn't make any sense at all. There's just reality, and I know what reality is. And people that don't have that reality are insane. It's not like they have a different opinion about it. They're just wrong. And I know in the deepest, part of my being what reality is, and, et cetera, et cetera. What's weird about it is you have atheistic materialistic unconsciously, and you're doing magic. That's why the atheists get upset. Someone who's a self-avowed atheist is always upset, because they're like, everybody knows there's no God. Everyone knows there's no spirits, but they still go around and saying they believe in God and still talk about magic, even though everybody knows there isn't anything. And this is the reason, one of the reasons I got interested in traditional astrology, because if you look at the traditional medieval Renaissance or Hellenistic or whatever, their philosophy, their worldview was a spiritual worldview, and that was in line with the technique that they were doing. So there's not this internal contradiction between what their worldview was and what their philosophy was and what they were trying to do. And so that's something that is very problematic. It's, I think, one of the biggest barriers for people in terms of really getting engaged with any kind of esoterics, because astrology, magic, and alchemy are applied spirituality, right? And if you're doing any kind of spiritual quest or whatever, or spiritual seeking, again, if you're coming up from the standpoint that there is no spirit, then that's just contradictory right off the bat, you know? So that's one of those things that's pushed me as far as why did I get involved with Sufism? Why didn't I get involved with Zen? Because their roots, even though the modern manifestations are very much in that spiritual worldview and that spiritual, taking that seriously as a reality. So that's another one of my, along with let's all, can't we all get along? That's another one of my big messages.
Yeah. Yeah. So I come from, 20 years background in yoga prior to this journey through astrology that I'm in now. And there's some parallels in that you can read all the yoga books and all the philosophy and all the things, but it's also a very practical, embodied thing that you actually have to practice. You actually either have to take the postures or do the meditations or kind of embody it. Do you have advice for people that want to engage the spiritual quality? I don't want to say like detox from their atheistic, materialistic world, but if someone's coming from a more magical or embodied or, taking, enfleshment or something like this, what would be your guidance if someone feels like, where am I? Am I an atheistic materialist? Do I believe in magic? Do I believe in things being embodied and alive? And, is there any qualities we can speak to around that for someone engaging?
I mean, this is what my Celestial Way was about.
Yeah.
Which was that if you're in a traditional society, right, Western or non-Western, before 1700, you would not need any introduction to spirituality because it would be a lived reality for you, mm-hmm. And but for us, we don't even know what spiritual means. So you have to spend a lot of time getting to the point where you can, and then if it's your thing, there are lots of applied spiritual things, like you said, yoga or whatever, lucid dreaming, for example, that's applied spirituality, really. And and so if you're interested in astrology, I've got some devotional practices that you can follow, like in the daily planetary practice. Essentially, every day is ruled by a planet, right? So for example, today's Wednesday, which is be ruled by Mercury. So I invoke Mercury, do a really short invocation, light a candle. And then so every day I do that for whatever planet rules the day. And I've been doing that for like 20 years. So it's a devotional practice. It's not like to get me stuff. It's basically, I want to be in contact with these celestial angels. And it's sort of like a saint. I mean, the Catholic sort of practice is really what I'm coming from. It's like, you can't tell them what to do. You can't make them give you stuff. You can't force them to do things. And if you make a mistake, you're not going to get a lot of blowback. It's not demonic. And so that's been kind of my model. And so, or planetary charity is another thing. I mean, if you have a planet that you, like say it's afflicted in a natal chart, however you want to define that, then you go out and you, for example, Saturn, you give a donation to a Saturn-ruled person, which is easy. Homeless people are ruled by Saturn. So lots of homeless people on Saturday, Saturn planetary hour, and you make a vow to do it a set number of times, and you do that. And again, not like gimme, but just because you want to have a better relationship with Saturn. And so this is a devotional style. And again, not the only way to do it, but that's, but these are applied spirituality. I mean, if astrology works, it's only for the spiritual sympathy of all things, and so same thing with magic. But there's this disconnect between, it's like, for example, Picatrix is very much what I would call a magical approach, which is you do this to get stuff. You want to cause a certain effect. And a lot of the stuff is I want love, or I want to destroy my enemies, or I want wealth or whatever, which is all good. But if you reverse engineer that, these invocations come from their religion, of the Iranian Sabians. And so you can take the magical stuff and say, okay, well, let's just contact the angel, right? Without necessarily worrying about too much about because the thing about it is that what I've found is if you don't focus on the effect, you get better effects.
I agree.
That whole Zen thing, it's like if you're too obsessed with, I want $5,000 in 2 weeks. I mean, that may not be the most effective way of going about getting it. Besides, the other thing that happens with people is that they fail in conventional methods. So they're going to use magic as a backup, and then it's going to work instantaneously. Put 5 seconds of effort and 2 minutes of work, and you get $1 million out of it. And if you don't get it instantaneously, it's obviously garbage. So it's like the idea of working at it and putting a lot of time into it. If you're going to affect the real world, you're not going to have instantaneous results of infinite power. You know what I mean? It's not Harry Potter. It's not a movie. And so the more skilled you are at it, the more talent you have for it naturally, the more effort you put into it, up to a point of diminishing returns, the better, quote, the results are going to be. But really, the results, I mean, as I get more into devotional practice, I'm less concerned about this, I want specific stuff out of it. I mean, I do believe that I've been able to support myself as a professional astrologer for 20 years and have a middle-class lifestyle. So, I mean, I have to attribute that to the, all this having a great relationship with the planetary and celestial angels to a certain extent. At the same time, I put a lot of work into it. I set all the stuff. I have website, business, all that sort of stuff. It's not like it just popped out of nowhere. But nevertheless, I do feel like that's been very beneficial to me. And so there's a lot of issues in there. Like I said, I'm not down on magic, but as the older I get, the more I'm, as you said, mentioned me being a celestial priest, I'm more drawn to that role for myself. At the same time, magic is, getting, it's sort of like, I need to get a job to make money. Well, you get a job, like that's fine. So if you need to do talismans to make money, that's fine too. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not like it's better. It's really a question of what you're drawn to, and if you're drawn to the spiritual side of it, but because really what the problem with the spiritual side of it is that means good. So that's what people say is be good, I'll be a liberal, I'll drive a Prius, I'll be a good person. I'll do all the good stuff I'm supposed to do, liberal stuff I'm supposed to do. And that's spiritual. It's like, no, it's not spiritual. I mean, spiritual isn't any political faction. It's not anything to do with that. Spiritual is really understanding what your true nature is, at least I'm in Buddhist, so I call that an operating system. I mean, all the major sort of spiritual paths are sort of like operating systems. Yeah. So it doesn't mean that anyone's better. I mean, like you have Linux, you got Windows, you got Mac. I just happen to use a Buddhist operating system for how I kind of structure things. And it's all done for me already. I mean, I get people that think they can create it. Like I'm as smart as Plato. I can make all the stuff up out of it. And it's the same old new age thrown together modern stuff that everybody else does. And they think it's unique. It's like, no, it's not. So, but the Buddhist standpoint would be the recognition that you don't exist what you've taken to be real, which is the self, is not real, And so a knowledge path or inquiry path, a Jnana yoga path is, understanding the true nature of reality. And so insofar as it assists with that, it's helpful, it's useful. If it doesn't, that's not useful. But again, that's just if that's your thing. I mean, if you're a hawk, you fly. You know what I mean? Yeah. And everybody's already enlightened. It's all perfect right now. All the crazy, stuff that seems bad is from our perspective as an individual. And it is bad from our perspective. I mean, and today I was getting all mad, the tree trimmers came on our power line and I thought they over trimmed my poor tree. And then they dumped a bunch of trees on top of my flowers. So I was digging that out and trying to get my landscaping back together. And I was all bent out of shape about that. But it's like, oh, whatever. I mean, this is like in the grand scheme of things, it's like it is as it's supposed to be. And that's the benefit of the Buddha stuff that I've done is to enable me to be in touch with those conceptually, but also be in touch with that, those spiritual realities on an experiential way, to experience no self, for example. And so that's what I would say about it is that, but at the same time, the practical stuff's useful. I mean, like the magical stuff, you need to be able to do things, it's perfectly like health magic. There's all sorts of positive things you can do with it. So it's like, you don't have to be like, oh, I'm going to be whatever, go to heaven or be enlightened or whatever your spiritual goal is with everything that you do. It's just kind of giving a balance. And hopefully in everything that I do, it's informed by a deeper spiritual understanding of reality. So for example, in terms of being a lawyer, then I have this understanding of what justice is. The law is this kind of balance of dualities between justice and mercy. Justice is giving people exactly what they deserve, but strict justice, it's an eye for an eye. We'd all be blind. Whereas mercy just means people running wild. If you just let everybody go and nobody has any consequences of their actions, you can commit all sorts of crimes and nothing happens, then the innocent are going to suffer from that. So that's this constant trade-off between justice and mercy. And so that's, I just reading this book about talking about, it was written in the 13th century. It was sort of a treatise on English law in the 13th century, written by these judges. And they said, we're the priests of law, we worship justice, and we engage in sacred acts. And the sacred act was to do justice. So it's like, that's a very, spiritual an exalted view of their function, right? And that's true of basically everybody. I was just reading a book about garbage collection, and that's super important. I mean, if you didn't have garbage collection regularly done well, you'll drown in garbage. You'll have disease and everything. I mean, it's super important. I mean, the garbage collectors are really saving us. They're really, really important people, just like, sewer or stuff like that. No one wants to think about that, and they get dumped on, but it's like everybody's function is important, you know, and, luckily my dharma is not to be, an axe murderer or, whatever, that sort of stuff. But that's, I guess, all part necessary in the process. I've been really blessed to have two careers that I've been able to be very, um, do a lot of stuff in. At the same time, I have no children, I have no family, I'm totally estranged. I was adopted, so I have my birth family wouldn't have anything to do with me. My adoptive family won't have anything to do with me. It's all, which is all on my chart. Like I said, if I look at my chart, it's just the unfolding of the pattern, and that's another wrap of mine. I get remediation. I get that a lot now because people are like, oh, I can look at my chart and it easily tells me what the problem is. And Saturn's afflicted in the seventh. So Saturn's beaming things at me and messing me up. So can you remediate? Can you fix that? Can you shield me from Saturn? That'll solve all my problems. It's like very simplistic approach. And nevertheless, you can look at the chart and you can see that patterning. And a lot of times people will be like, I don't like this, I don't like that. It's like, this is part of the pattern. It's like the negatives are just as important as the positives in your chart. You know what I mean? Everybody is this unified whole. Everyone is this expression of the unity of existence, and in individual manifestation. And so, it just is what it is. And it's like, there's stuff, like I said, I mean, I kind of like to have a family, but no, that wasn't my thing. So this is just, it is what it is, and I'm at peace with that. Now I have other things to compensate. So, I mean, there's plenty of people that have a terrible life, so it would be difficult to do that. But my view of that is that before they embodied, they were given a choice and they're like, okay, I'll take this on. The soul's like, I'll embody in this life. I know it's difficult, but it needs to be done. And I need to burn off some karma and I'll do it, And I think that that's my view of how that stuff works. But, the great thing about astrology for me was it was a very concrete example of this, that the spiritual does exist, right?
Yeah.
The atheistic materialism leads to nihilism, and nihilism is nothing's meaningful. It's just subatomic particles bumping together. There's no meaning in everything. There's no patterning. It's all random, and that's all there is. And you live, and it sucks, and you die, and life sucks, and it's terrible, And it's like, by doing the astrology, like horary, I've done 5,000 horary questions, and I'm like, I can see the patterning. I can see that there's this underlying patterning to reality that's a spiritual patterning. And that was extremely helpful to me to break me out of that atheistic materialistic view and also the nihilist view too. Because that's the worst thing we have. I mean, people are, they talk about fentanyl or opioids or all that stuff, poverty. People are killing themselves because they think their life is meaningless, and there's plenty of people that can spontaneously realize that they're not, but our society has deprived people officially of a philosophy or meaning. And that's probably one of the worst crimes of atheistic materialism is to deny people meaning, because you can put up with a lot of suffering and pain if it's meaningful, but if life is meaningless, it's awful. And so that's what the astrology brings to me, is that I can see that there's this patterning. And not only that, I can actually predict based on it. Someone comes to me and says, well, I get the job. I'm like, no. And they're like, yeah, you got it right. So it's just like, yep, that patterning it's not just a metaphor. It's not just symbolic. It's actually, I can predict based on it. So that's got a level of reality that's really kind of, if you really focus in on it and you're open to it, then it really does, open you up to the reality of it. And so that's what I would say about it, is one of the most important things about astrology and magic is that if you do it and it works, that's pretty revolutionary, And so with me, my whole life was kind of, I was open to it, was overturned. It had a revolutionary effect. A lot of people compartmentalize. So they have one little weird thing that they do, like, okay, I'm a chaos magician, but everything else are totally conventional, and they live the rest of their life in an atheistic, materialistic, conventional approach. But yeah, they got this one thing that they do, and it hasn't had that kind of, they've locked it into that one compartment, and they haven't allowed it to have that effect. They haven't seen the underlying, if this works, what is that? What are the implications of that? So I think that that's something that's important to run with as well. So
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And yeah, I think with magic or with astrology or how you describe the chart and people's idea of remediation, I have in your footsteps started the practice of daily planetary ritual and honoring each day and each planet. And when for me, that was the sort of beauty or what was kind of addicting about astrology was that it does imbue everything with meaning. Like this plant is in the form of Saturn, or, and so when we're approaching the planets, it's almost like, and I don't, maybe I'm wrong with this, but it's like if you think of the planets as alive and you think of these qualities as living and that have this magical worldview, it's like having a friend and only asking them for something when you need it. It's like, no, you go to that friend, cultivate the relationship, find out their qualities, how they like to be approached, what their vibe is, and appreciate them in your life. And if you happen to have a favor that they have the acumen for, they have the disposition for, then maybe that comes about. But mostly it's like by knowing you, then I also start to attain some of those qualities. And I also start to relish in the fact of that friendship and that like connection. So you do naturally get the boon from those qualities or an understanding of those qualities. So if you were needing to tap into those qualities, you've built those relationships,
yeah, I mean, you've perfectly expressed the sort of vibe that I'm trying to put across to people. That's the model that I'm trying to say is like I said, like a friendship, like what can I get out of it? That's not going to be a very good friendship if that's your whole basis is what can I get out of it? Because the person's going to resent that, and they just want to get used. And it's like, that's not going to work very well. And it's like, but these are models. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Before you go ahead and say, this is the way it works and everybody else has got to do it. It's like, this is a model. And it's like, it works sometimes for some things and it doesn't completely fit reality. I mean, reality is beyond any particular one model, and the simpler your model, the less it fits reality. That's why traditional astrology is so complex because it's trying to model reality. And so it has to be very complicated to do that. It's like law is very complex because again, you're trying to find a mapping of dispute resolution that fits reality. Very complex.
Yeah.
So, but that's what I would say about it is that, and that it a lot of people want to do magic. I mean, the reason they're doing this is because they want stuff. And I'm not going to dump on that. I'm not going to say that's bad. I'm just going to say that is a different approach. And my own heart pulled me towards this. And so that's why I like putting it out there because it gives people an opportunity. But what you just said is just like, you got it. You 100% are grooving on exactly what I was, trying to put out there. But it's an approach that isn't really that weird because it's like, it is very Catholic. You know what I mean? The devotional Catholic side, you know what I mean? Like doing novenas, and this venerating the saints, and all that stuff. Very popular in Middle Ages. This is what the Protestants did. They came in and threw that stuff out. They're like, oh, that's bad. It's magical. Because I meet people now all the time that like, I talk to God. I mean, the ultimate power of the universe, you're having conversations with him directly. I'm like, you're using an intermediary. I mean, everything's God, but don't tell me you're talking to the big. That's all there is too. There's no other spiritual beings except God either. There's just one guy, and white guy on with the beard on the clouds with the thunderbolt kind of dude. It's like that's no wonder people. That's stupid. I mean, no wonder people refuse to accept that. That's what the fundamentalists. The thing about fundamentalists is they're actually atheist and materialist. Because I mean, I keep reading this stuff in the newspaper all the time, like the Noah's Ark is discovered. It's like, well, if he found the physical ark, that would prove it because that's the highest level of truth, right? So if he found a physical piece of the ark, then that proves the Bible's true. There you go. It's like you guys don't get it. I mean, the Bible has some incredible stuff in it. There's so much wisdom, and so much stuff, but it's not symbolic either. It's not like, oh, it's not true. It's like the spiritual truths that are there are just incredible. And you know, it's funny, I've got this quote right here underneath my computer. It's actually from the Gospel of Thomas, but it says, the Pharisees and scribes have taken the keys of Gnosis and hidden them. So be ye wise as serpents and gentle as doves. Now that's definitely also a Matthew or something like that. It's in the New Testament, but that's one of my favorite things is be ye wise as serpents and gentle as doves. I'm like, that's a great approach because instead of the modern approach, a saint is a doormat. You just let yourself be taken advantage of. You give and give and give, and you never let anyone just abuse you. And that's a saint. And I'm like, you're not helping people by letting them get away with stuff.
Yeah.
And But the wise as serpents is also too, because you don't want to be biting people or be evil or whatever. But that understanding of wise as serpents, you understand the dark side. You know what I mean? That's a whole understanding of the nature of reality, both light and dark, but
Mhm.
gentle as doves. So I love that. This is really great. So the Christian stuff, I mean, it doesn't particularly appeal to me. There's a church that has this big picture of Jesus, and I'm kind of like, I don't know. But I love Mary. I'm doing Hail Marys every day. I have this prayer sequence. One of the things I do, I'll just talk about this a little bit. One of the Western approaches is that everything's exclusive, right? And it comes, I think, from like the original, like Judaism is sort of the beginning of that Judaic, and that's basically to be Jewish, you need your mother needs to be Jewish. You know what I mean? And they're
Yeah.
kind of suspicious of converts. They're not really accepting of the really Orthodox. You can't become Jewish. I mean, you just are Jewish. And so
Mhm.
that's, which was perfectly legitimate, but that's a particular style and approach. And it kind of goes into the both Islam and Christianity in that you have to convert because you can only be Christian. And I remember talking to this person who was like, it was really hard to be Buddhist in Georgia because at Christmas time. I'm like, you can be Buddhists don't have anything against Christmas. Celebrate Christmas. See, I have a lot of influence with Japan. You can see in the back that's a Shinto altar. It's a Kamidana. Um, and their approach is very eclectic. And they'll be simultaneously doing Shinto stuff and Buddhist stuff and whatever else they want to mix into it. So that's what I do. My evening prayer round is the daily planetary practice, right? And I have altars I have a fixed star altar, a mansion of the moon altar. I have Buddhist altars. I do a short Buddhist prayer. I do a Shinto invocation. Then I do the Fatiha, which is the Muslim opening prayer because of my Sufi stuff. And then I do Hail Marys, right? So it's very eclectic, right? Because these are the areas that have influenced me, and I'm doing that every single day, and it's so I'm like basically a heretic in every single one of those, officially, because you can't
No, I
combine
really,
Islam and Christianity, but you can if you have if you don't have if you have an Eastern approach, because
if
it's
you
like,
have
let's
a
just say,
pagan worldview, you can go ahead and celebrate Christmas, and you can go ahead and celebrate solstice, and you are fine to do all of the above.
but I wouldn't say I'm a pagan either, because that's, it's
Yeah,
sort of like whatever that means. I mean, it's sort of
yeah,
like, because
right.
that's a thing. You're a pagan and you're not a Christian then, right? And
Yeah, I
so
just
that's what
meant
I
it
would
in
say
kind
is
of,
like,
I meant it in the eclectic view of like everything that wasn't Abrahamic was pagan or something that had like a multi-dimensional
but
eclectic.
Buddhism isn't really pagan, is it?
I don't know if they would consider themselves
But you see what
pagan.
I'm saying?
Yes.
Rather than going at, because that's a Western category. And so they have like chaplains in the army and they have Sunday school and they have this template for everyone that wants to be a religion has to fit the template. And because that's what I noticed, like with Zen, people come and asking about Sunday school. Like, what's that Sunday school? Like, what does Zen have to offer children? I'm like, nothing. I mean, Zen is not it's not even for the average person. It's a super difficult, complex, I wouldn't want to say elite, but it is like to really do it, it's a difficult practice. And
Mhm.
so, it's not for families. It's not for a community, it's stuff like that. It's like Zen is direct pointing to reality, you
Yeah.
know? And so this is sort of like, but everything has to be fit into that template. So that's what I'm saying. This is an approach that's not coming from a Western approach. This is stepping out and saying, I can simultaneously, it's also sort of hermetic, because that's one of the things I like being mercurial myself. Hermetic is to be, you have my cake and eat it too. Like,
Yeah,
you
maybe
can be
that's
Muslim and Christian at the same time. I mean, what the heck?
when I
And
use pagan, it's like almost making fun of how they would talk about anything that wasn't the one way as, pagan or something. But hermetic is a perfect way of putting it. Some things that actually connect to you and influence your life and how they can all move together and be venerated in that way, perfectly fine with inside of the worldview, you
yeah,
know?
I mean, it's just one of those things of like, there's a natural sort of synthesis. And the question is, what are you basing your synthesis on? You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
if it's based on a sort of a modern, there's not very deep roots to that. You know what I mean? It's like I said, particularly where it's not, it's your philosophy, your worldview is there's nothing but matter and energy, right? And then you're trying to be spiritual on top of it. Again, that's all very problematic. Also, like I said, you know, the Buddhist view is that there is no self, which people find to be completely insane because that's their most basic reality is the I-ness, right?
Mhm.
But, um, you know, the idea there's again, like, I guess you go to heaven or whatever, but you keep, you have same thing with reincarnation. It's me. And then well, first I was Cleopatra, then I was a donkey, and now I'm me. It's like, which is again, I mean, yeah, possibly. But like I said, there's a lot of different, there's our alternatives to, the sort of narrative that we have. And I think that's just what's useful for me. And like, for example, being initiated as a Sufi or doing the Zen really heavily, is that you get really heavily into those, and it's the soil that they're coming out of, the roots they're coming out of is pre-modern. And so
Yeah.
that's useful. And anything that you do deeply is can be very useful. If you have I had a teacher that said you can't dig a well with a bunch of shallow holes. So running around just like, particularly like I watched it on YouTube. I saw this thing of these poor people that went off and died in the wilderness, and they said, oh, they watched some YouTube videos. I'm like, well, there you go. It's like, that was not enough to learn how to live through a winter like in Montana or whatever just by watching. But they thought, well, just watch some YouTube videos.
So this
It's like,
YouTube video is not enough. Take Christopher Warnock course, read
well,
the complete Picatrix.
yeah.
So that does actually, there is a question that I have about this, because I asked a couple of friends who are, along with the channel. I was like, is there anything that if you had to speak with Christopher, or if you think the audience might want to know? And I guess it comes back to the person asking me to speak about the Picatrix. And I think, we've talked enough about it, and you talk about it a lot in the celestial way, but is there in the past now any advice for like the approach for beginners? So they're like, oh my gosh, the Picatrix is so complex, these systems of astrology are so complex. I say that's a boon, right? Because that means we have something to do for the next 20 years. Yay, you don't have to cram it in this year, next year. You have this long, beautiful system that you can learn. But as a beginner, I guess, is it just back to that kind of looking at the worldview, connecting with yourself, having a basic daily practice? And then, what is there advice from your mage-like self for someone that has those issues with daily practice? For me, I'm a bhakti by just my cells. Like every day is like an outpouring. So it's easy for me. I have a temple in my house. I go there every day. It's natural. What can we do as beginners when we approach the Picatrix and we're like, oh my God, it's so complex. Where do I start? I would point people to your book, The Celestial Way, but anything you can say in this YouTube video, like to inspire
I
beginners or
mean,
tell them where to look?
I wouldn't be too like flip about it, but it's sort of like buy it, put it on your shelf. It looks cool, and then go on to the next thing. You know what I mean? Because it's not for everybody. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not like this is a stump that's supposed to be like easily accessible. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Either it's engaging to you and you naturally engage
Exactly.
it,
That's what I'm
or
saying is like if you're not into it, then just like I said, buy copies. I'm sure I love people buying copies of it, but it's sort of like, it's, there is my mission has always been to the one in a million person. You know what I mean? This is
yeah.
because, like I said, I have no family. I haven't, what I mean, this is like I'm a professional astrologer. There's not that many professional astrologers out there. There's a lot of people that are like looking at their own chart. I mean, I get so many people that think they know all about it. They email me and they start lecturing me about stuff
About their
constantly.
own chart or
No,
whatever.
no, about astrology. They're
Oh, about
telling me about
astrology.
astrology. They're
Oh my
letting me
God.
know, giving me, laying it down the rules for me and letting me know, and they're experts already. They know all about it, and they're gonna let me know that how big an expert they are.
Oh
So
my
it's
God.
just like I know it's a little crazed. Luckily, I need customers, so I have to be nice to them because it's my natural inclination. Because I'm Saturnine, I have Saturn in Aquarius rising, so I'm like Saturn all the way. Would be to be very, cranky and stuff like that. So luckily, like I said, it's funny you say about being bhakti because I'm a Jnana yoga very
Mhm.
heavily, but the bhakti is very important. You want a balance of the approaches, and that's what I would say about it. I mean, I think that potentially astrology could be like a Western tantra, right? But I did not attain enlightenment or a kensho through that. And my approach has been Jnana yoga. So that was kind of the thing. I had some email me and they were like, he's talking about something. I forget, he was asking me a question. I said, you should check out Celestial Way. And he's like, well, it's got spelling mistakes in it and it doesn't do fixed stars. And I'm like, well, I'm trying to go from what I know myself. You know what I mean? I'm not going to give anything that I haven't actually experienced myself. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I've only got to this point with this. So there's a lot of, it's like the devotional practices in there, the base is in there, but like we talk about perfect nature. which is very
That part
spiritual,
was
very
beautiful.
interesting, but it's not something that I've attained or done. It's kind of out there for as a marker for people, and you can go ahead and roll on from that. And it's interesting because Henri Corbin in this Man of Light and Iranian Sufism, which I was just looking at the other day for some reason, starts talking about Picatrix. I'm like, I didn't know he was talking about Picatrix, but that's that whole perfect nature stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's the spirit of the mage united with the spirit of their planet is perfect nature. And it's kind of like guardian angel. So in other words,
Mhm.
it's somewhat external and somewhat internal. You know what I mean? It's your higher self in a sense. It's you, but it's also external to you insofar as you see yourself as like this body or whatever. So there's
Yeah.
that stuff in there. What I would say about it is that the people that they're drawn to this, they'll see this in the blank. Oh my God, they just go crazy about it. It's just like they
Mhm.
have to do it. And they're the ones that are willing to spend a year taking the course and going through all this stuff, right? And so there's also going to be popular pop versions of it. You know what I mean? And it's like it's like it'll be called Picatrix, and they'll wave the book around and they'll just make up some new age stuff. You know what I mean? But that's okay. I mean, this is just how the natural stuff goes with it. And it's like not everybody has to be super serious, heavy duty, whatever. So, but that's what I would say about it is just like, if it's your thing, go for it. If
Yeah.
it's not, there's a lot of other stuff you can do. And I mean, you can buy talismans without knowing anything about it at all.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot of, I'm making talismans. A lot of people have talismans. I mean, you don't have to get into all the technical details behind it in terms of accessing the talismanic magic. Like I said, the daily planetary practice, anybody can do that. Planetary charity, anybody can do that. Talismans, anybody can do that. So buying a talisman at least. And so, I mean, I have like these intro courses, like I have a planetary magic mini course, which just has planetary hours, which
Uh-huh.
is cool. Now, what people have been doing with that though, is taking the planetary magic mini course that's just planetary hours and trying to like get me to teach them the whole astrological magic course in that course.
You're
And I'm like,
right.
no, it's just planetary hours. Like, what about this? What about this? What about this? I said, we deal with that in the astrological magic course. So that's
Right.
a problem I'm getting with people. Plus, they already know it all anyway. They are, and then they'll not shy about telling me that they're a big expert and they know this stuff and then tell me what I should be doing with it. So I get a certain amount of that too. So
Well,
it's sort of like,
self-respect, people need to realize this is Christopher Warnock, a 20-year mage. So, and also what I love about your approach is it's not the only one. There's many, and also find the one that suits you, your disposition. And I think that's a beautiful and humble approach to give new students. So yeah, if you are interested in it, you're gonna, and I have this thing of like, the more sort of unique and like refined you become, not to think of it like a pyramid, but it's like the less people are going to meet you there, right? Like you're just going to obviously be more and more niche. So there's only going to be a few people that are into this like deep study or like, high level thing, but you have to go where it calls you. You have to be engaging in the practice to what fits your lifestyle. And some people are just going to dive right in, take the year-long course, want to experience the whole Picatrix. But if you are one of those people and you're feeling overwhelmed, I think the Celestial Way is a beautiful way to start because there's so much about the Picatrix in here, and then about that daily practice, how to approach it.
I mean, the other thing about my courses is they start right from the beginning because people
Uh-huh.
say, "Oh, I don't know anything about astrology." I'm like, "Good. You won't have to unlearn anything." I mean,
Oh my
and
God,
they
that's the
start
biggest thing to
right from the get-go, and every single course I have, because people say, "Which one should I start with?" I'm like, "You can start with whatever one you want, whatever one you find interesting." Because again, I start right from the beginning because I
Mhm.
want to kind of I have what I say to about it too is like, do it my way, see how I do it, and then when you're done with the course, you can decide whether you want to do it that way or not. But while you're doing the course, do it my way so you can see how I'm doing it. Because a lot of it's just like it's like watching carpentry. Like, how do I use this tool? How do I do that? And that gives you, because people are people are like, oh, what about this or that? And I'm like, we're not doing that in this course. It's like
Yeah.
it's just a different kind of like, which is not to say it's wrong. It's just like what I'm doing is I know this works, do it this way. And then once you have that base, then you have a basis for deciding because a lot of
Whether it
times the
works
reason
for you
people
or
are
not.
doing things, yeah, people are doing things because they saw it on the internet and because everybody else is doing it. And it's like that's not necessarily the best basis for why you should do certain things.
For
And
sure.
it's
That's an
the biggest
understanding.
meme. I had somebody call me the other day and they were like completely freaked out because they had heard that the heliacal rising of Mercury in 2 weeks was going to be so great and they were going to miss it and then ruin it. The whole life. It's all blah, 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 blah. I said, they wanted me to elect something. I said, I won't be using heliacal rising of Mercury. It doesn't mean that's wrong, but I just say I don't use that technique, you know? And
Hmm.
so, but that's the thing is they get so hyped about it because that's the way the internet works is they want your attention. So they're going to put stuff on there. They're going to, it's the most important thing ever. And it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, or it's a disaster and it's free, don't do this or whatever. Like algal is a good example of that. I like algal. I mean, algal's pretty powerful. You got to be very respectful of algal, but I really like algal. But there's so much like fear and all that. I mean, a lot of astrology is about reassurance and a false sense of control, you know? And so, because what passes for astrology now is Hitler's chart or Einstein's chart. So look, it shows this and that. I'm like, you can make anything out of any chart if you know what the results are. I mean, if you're not predicting, if you have like a natal chart where you don't know the person, you know what's happened to them, or you have a horary question, you don't know the outcome, and then you make a prediction in writing based on that, that's predictive. But looking at the chart and saying, oh, that's my blah, 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 it's like, I mean, that's so you can feel better about yourself. And I get that too with reassurance, like with horary. When will I get a job? And so I'll say to people, well, is it going to help you if I say you're not going to get a job? And they're like, oh, but I have to, I really need a job. I'm like, this is not to say, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. This is going to tell you what's likely to happen. And it could
Right.
be bad. It could be good or it could be bad. Is that going to
Right.
help you?
Yeah.
So that's what I would say about it is there's a lot of, or people like, I have this neighbor, it's strange because they know that I'm kind of doing something with astrology, but they have the same thing. They're always telling me about astrology and they don't really pay much attention to what I have to say about it because it's like he's just my neighbor, you know what I mean? And they saw it online, you know what I mean? And I'm always in the minority. Part of the reason I'm always saying, lots of valid approaches is because I'm always in the minority. And so I'm going to get stomped. I'm always wrong, you know what I mean, compared to what everybody else says online. I mean, I'm always seem to be zigging while they're zagging. And so it's kind of like a self-preservation thing of like, if I don't have that attitude, then I'm really going to I'm dead because stuff
I,
gets popular and then that's the consensus and then it's all over. There's no more, it's closed off. And we're getting this very closed off practice in a lot of ways.
it's a very Saturnine thing too, where you're the trailblazer, but also the scapegoat. So it's like, man, I've been doing this for 20 years, unrecognized. All of a sudden, it's recognized, and then I'm on the out somehow or whatever, and trying to make like lessen that friction. But yeah, I completely
But
agree.
see, part of it is this is that, I've done a reasonably good job of kind of putting out there the stuff that I've done. And I've gotten, I mean, like, just like you're amazing. Like, oh, I mean, that's like saying, oh, you're, telling me all the stuff, how great I am. I love it. I'm lapping it up. But it's because that's what I think. I think I'm wonderful, which I
Yeah.
mean, who doesn't think they're wonderful? But part of it is that, you know, it's easy to get isolated. It's easy to get, not recognized. Because like I said, I have had an influence and it's pleasant for me to realize that I've had a fairly positive influence. Not everything I've done is positive,
You have.
but
And I think this interview, I mean, we have a small channel, but I really like part of this. I mean, I had an excuse to reach out to you in this way, but for me, you have. And I think for a lot of people, whether or not you're getting your flowers for it, hopefully you do, because, people like you have trailblazed intensely in this space for us.
this is my function though. That's what I'd say about it. Like a lot of stuff, like planetary charity. I wouldn't say I invented it because I was in Vedic, but I'm the one who kind of got the idea of doing it in Western astrology. And I see a lot of other people doing it. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I don't necessarily get credit for it, but I don't necessarily need credit for it because that's, like I said, my job is to be the trailblazer, do the heavy lifting, do the heavy philosophical stuff, do the heavy technique stuff. And then other people are going to go on and popularize it. You know what I mean? And that's perfectly fine. I mean, because I'm just not attuned to a pop, sensibility. I mean, I'm old too. I'm 60. So I'm just
Yeah.
not in tune with, a lot of the stuff because I get to a point now where I'm like, because I was raised basically in the 70s, right? And with parents that were kind of 50s. So that's kind of my approach. And that's very much out of tune with the modern sensibility in a lot of ways. You know what I
Maybe, but
mean?
I think there's a lot of, kids like me or whatever that really love the approach and like really want to validate and really want to learn deeper and longer. And we do appreciate that kind of track that people like yourself have set up. So give Christopher's flowers in the comments below, you guys. Like,
What's kind of gratifying to me was that how close. I mean, you nailed it with the whole friendship stuff. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, you got it. Because that's what I was trying to put out there, was sort of, that was the model. I'm like, if that's getting across to people, then I'm communicating it appropriately.
You are,
And
and that's
so
how I've always felt. And when I found your work, and I always appreciate that you always lay that out in all of your videos, and you're always saying that when I've heard you in your interviews and in anything that I've consumed from your generous offerings, I always hear that. And it's always been something that I really resonate. Like, how are you going to like fall in love if you're just demanding something straight out of the gate with language to your lover or something? Lovers do not want to be demanded of. They want to be respected and connected with. And I think that is sort of that animistic or magical approach of like, listen, things are living around us, and we're in unison or harmony or not with those things, you know? So yeah, thanks.
I think that's, the thing too is, like I'd say about it, is that, you know, it's easy. My problem too is that one complaint and I'm freaking out about it for days, 50 compliments and I'm just brushing them off. You know what I mean? So that's part of an orientation that I need to reorient in terms of my personality, because it's like, what that's revealing is, because everybody has a sort of, in an inner state, like a karmic state, inner state, like, I was abused as a child or this or that or whatever, and it gets triggered off. And so one of the things that's useful, this is, like I said, you've been incredibly, positive and complimentary in ways that I like too, not complimenting me for stuff that's like, I don't value, but saying all the stuff that's great. So this is really awesome. And I think it's validating to me that, I have had this consistent approach that I've tried to take, and that the right kind of people are appreciating it. The other thing I would say though is, like, if you're like, oh, I don't like him, like, that's cool too. It's like, but recognize it's a preference. It's like, I don't like the Christopher Warnock approach, like I don't like chocolate ice cream, as opposed to, oh, he's an idiot and it's just going to throw it all out. You know what I mean? And that's what I would say about it, is that most of what we do is preference, right? And most of what our choices are not of right and wrong, right? And there's a tendency to want, if I don't like it, then I'll just toss it, and it's bad and I'm going to attack it or whatever. But it's like, you know what? Just relax, take your preference, do what you want, follow your own thing, and then just recognize that, but that's just a preference.
And also, this isn't for you. Go ahead, go away.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I say too, is like, I just feel like it's like, not go away, but it's just like, I have, like I said, I also have a structured sort of approach to things. You know what I mean? Because one of the things I get, for example, with courses is people buy the course and then they'll email me and just start asking random questions, because I'm their esoteric Google now. And they don't need to do the course lessons. They can just ask me a bunch of questions. And I'm like, well, we'll deal with that later in the course. Oh, but this or that. Or I came across this question. I'm like, the way I teach is like, there's certain things I want you to learn in each lesson. And if you learn that, you go on to the next. There's no tests, there's no, deadlines, there's no, it's just, I want to make sure you learn the stuff, so you do the homework. And if you have a question that's necessary for the homework, in my opinion, I want to work with you on it. But just, oh, I came across this thing that came up in the course, would you answer it for me? I'm like, I have a lot of students. I don't have time to like do all this.
Your ear, or they just want
yeah. And I'm like, at the same time, if people work their way through it, you know what I mean? I'm willing to give that time to people, but it's just like, it's just one of those things about getting used to that very traditional. I mean, I had this, I studied with an Iranian Ayatollah, and he was a graduate of their whole, the madrasa system. And he was the equivalent of like a freestanding Supreme Court justice, basically. And he'd also got a PhD from the University of Toronto. But when we went to class, we would stand up when he came in to show the respect for the teacher, right? And that is really lacking in moderns, because they already know it all. I'm just a waiter. Just get your ass in gear and bring me the stuff that I want. And it's like, that is a really bizarre approach to me, because it's like, as arrogant as I am, I always was very respectful of my teachers. And if they told me to do something, I would do it, and I get that. Now, part of it is I'm cranky, contumacious, Mars Leo kind of person. So I get into these conflicts with people, but I'm just kind of astounded by the number of students that are like, I mean, I've had people that, like, for example, like do aspects by hand, because normally the software does all the aspects for you. You don't need to worry about the calculation. It's all right down on the chart. But just as an exercise, in one of my lessons, I have people do it by hand, right? I'm not very good at that myself. I mean, I have to look at a chart. I'm like, oh God, how to do that stuff. But I think it's useful to kind of get under the hood once in a while. I've had people that couldn't do that, and I said, don't worry about it. It's not necessary. Well, that's not a good thing to spend your energy on anyway. It's not vital. Let's go on to this. And the other refused. And they started screaming at me and quit the course because I wouldn't, because my job was to do what they wanted to do, right? And they wanted to learn that. And if you don't want to teach me, you're a bad teacher. And, and I'm not going to pay attention to what you have to say. You have to teach me that. And I was just like, we need to move on. We need to, because it's not, I mean, there's only a limited amount of information. Like people want to do charts by hand. I'm like, if you want to do that, you can do it on your own, but we don't need it for the course. I mean, I have to really strictly limit the stuff we learn because it's an infinite amount of stuff you could be learning. So I have a very focused approach.
That's a quality of a good teacher. And I mean, if you have such a vast mind that has all these good questions and you want to explore all those things, great. First, and I said this recently to someone where I was like, well, I have to first work my way through this person's work who I'm interested in order to even criticize it. Like, because they were saying, oh, maybe don't this person that. And I was like, yeah, well, I don't even have good criticisms of this person's work because I haven't even studied all of their work. So it's like, okay, if you want to study Hellenistic, okay. If you want to study Renaissance, okay. If you want to study yoga in this style, okay. But take your teacher's advice, take it for what it is, go through it until the end, and then ask really poignant questions and decide if it's for you or if it's not for you. Or maybe some people can take it hopefully for what it is in that vein. Like I studied Jyotish as well, different forms of astrology, and I don't find them to be competing. I find them all to be very interesting, and they all work within inside of the framework of that structure or that teacher, or whatever knowledge they're trying to impart on you. And I'm sorry your students or the community has been
but what I would say about that is, again, it's that one of my like 1 out of 100 people. You know what I mean? Because basically my students are people that they're not taking it for a job, right? They're not going to make money off of it. They're only studying it because they're interested in it. And that's like, and I'm not teaching 18-year-olds either. I get adults. So I have amazing students. I mean, and people that are really doing this just for the pure joy of learning. And it's like, that's like, it's funny because people, like tests. I'm like, ugh, I hate tests. It's like grading. Ugh, it's horrible. Like, why bother? The only purpose of that is so the employer can decide, they can rank them for employment purposes. I mean, the educational industrial complex, I mean,
it's
I was taking classes, it's just horrible. And I'm like, let it all fall apart. We don't need colleges anymore. I mean, I feel like for the most part, they're useless, and as a way of learning anything is you come out of it hating to learn. You know what I mean? Or you jam for I mean, one of the things with my courses is that I don't let people go through it more than one lesson every 3 weeks. Because people, how long does it take? I'm like, that's the wrong question. That's not the question to ask. Because you can fit it into your lifestyle. I mean, you can take as long as you want, right? So it's not like you're going to, but the way to do it is like you have lectures, like you watch video lectures and take notes, right? And then you have a test, and then you forget everything after the test, and then you're through the course in whatever set period of time, and everyone does it together. And it's so hard for people to get used to my teaching level because I'm like, take as much time as you want. Because people are always emailing saying, oh, I'm sorry, I haven't turned my lessons. I'm like, whatever, do whatever you want, feel like it. Requires you to be very self-disciplined. But also you can fit it into your life. It's not like you have to spend. And then the no test stuff and no grades, I was like, whatever. I mean, if people cheat, I don't care. I mean, I'll encourage it, right? But you're only cheating yourself.
Yeah, you're doing it
for knowledge. It's for knowledge. What's the freaking point? And I have these certificates that I do, but I started off and I didn't have certificates. But I don't find them. It says, it's kind of fancy looking certificate. And I'm like, I understand that, but it's like, ultimately the key is that you're my student. You know what I mean? Because I think in a lineage, it's a very traditional lineage sort of approach. So I'm in the horary lineage, like that Olivia Barclay, QHP, like, John Frawley, Deb Holding, Lee Lehman, that lineage. And I'm in part of that.
You're a student of Robert Zoller as well. Like, are you?
Well, what I would say about that is that I wasn't formally a student of his in his diploma course, but what he did was privately tutor me with sort of magical philosophy. So he really got me going in terms of the worldview stuff and the philosophy stuff. He was very helpful, but I didn't study the natal with him. So I'm not in his natal lineage, but he was really key in terms of getting me oriented in terms of the philosophy. Now, he didn't do any magic openly. you know,
Mhm.
and in fact, I did talismans for him. But he was a Lutheran. He was big into being a Lutheran. And,
Oh,
but I've started a lineage. Like I said, my astrological magic lineage is my lineage. So and
yeah.
I would
And
expect,
speaking
like
of
I said,
which,
my students will, yeah, that's
this
planetary
book,
magic. Yeah.
this is a really great book for anyone.
Good
And
intro.
as an introductory like space, obviously, if you want to go deeper, get the Picatrix, do the course.
What I would say is that here's the thing, like the three hermetic arts are astrology, alchemy, and magic, right? And I've gotten seriously into astrology and magic. Alchemy just never was my thing, right? It's very, I mean, it's incredibly important and very valid and everything like that. But
Mhm.
I read books about it. It's not
Mhm.
like I don't, you know what I'm saying? But I recognize that that's just sort of giving me an overview. And so that's what I would say about it is it's perfectly okay to come along and get an overview, right? And that's what I'd say, like the Secrets of Planetary Magic on my to-do list is an astrological magic book,
Yay.
you know, but
We are all
it's,
patiently,
yeah,
very
we'll see.
waiting.
Actually, I'm writing a book on evictions right now. I'm writing it's not exactly a legal treatise, but like practical law of evictions, because that's one of the things I do landlord tenant law. So
Uh-huh.
that's kind of on my radar right now. And then I've got a book on electional astrology that I've kind of
That would be nice.
worked on too. But it's like it sort of comes when it comes. Like right now, it seems to be all legal, is what the muse is
Yeah,
giving me.
no,
But
no.
I'm trying to like, I feel like my function at this point is to do that kind of overall synthesis and kind of, and point out possible paths for people to take going forward with it.
Yeah.
And
And I think the Celestial Way did a great job of like personifying all those things that you talk about. And then your website's extremely extensive. Course is
ancient.
amazing. What's
It's sort
that?
of like a blast from the past. You can like, it's like a time warp. You get on that website and it's like 2000, you
Yeah,
know?
but it's so extensive and good. Like it's such a resource. I know so many people that say the same thing is like the website's old, but they love it because it's so extensive. We all love your website. Don't
Here's the
worry.
thing about the website is that, um, I looked into, first of all, the way it's set up now, I can code it myself, which
Which is
every day I'm recoding. So I'm doing a lot of that stuff. If, so I looked into having contemporary website. And so here's the deal. Because Google changes their algorithm every like 15 minutes, you have to basically redo your website every month,
yeah.
right? And so unless you're going to be like the New York Times and have like a full-time staff of 500 people on staff, or you can have a website with 5 pages on it. I mean, you could do like Shopify and do that and have the templates and everything like that. But if you're going to have my website has like 700 pages.
I know it's
Because
so extensive. So good.
my web hoster, cold called me and said, "Oh, we want to do a website for you." I said, "Okay, I want to do a 500-page website." And they're just like, they're like, they don't want to do it. I mean, they probably would charge me, if someone would charge me $20,000, $30,000 to do it, and then it'd have to be redone in a week.
Yeah.
So that's
No,
why
we
I
love
keep
your
on
website.
saying, I sort of apologize. I feel like, geez, it's like trying to ride a unicycle on the highway kind of thing, but it's like,
Yeah, but for us
it is what it
occultists, we
is.
like it. There's so much in there, and there's nooks
It's
and
become a
crannies.
thing though. That's what I would say about it is if it was 5 years out of date, it would just be kind of doofusy. But if it's 20 years out of date, it's kind of crazed. I
It's
mean, it's this
cool.
kind of weird, like total time warp craziness that's got this old, like I said, it's like 2000. Seriously, it's like a 20-year-old website. And
We
the
love
fact that
it.
it's fully functional, it is a little, I've had people emailing like, is this still working? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'm still here. And it's like, so I sort of feel a little bad about it, but if I had another way to do it, here's the thing is like, it got to be what it was because it had good content.
Yes.
But if I'm going to maintain that content, I would have, like I said, I'd have to have 50 people on staff,
Oh, and people do have
recoding it
staff.
all the
I
time.
think people don't understand like when you're on the Instagram or when you're on the YouTube sphere and you're seeing these astrologers and they have like all this, like following and all, you don't realize they have a staff of 10 people. Like I'm just doing my thing, like with my own editing. It's like people don't realize how much happens behind the scenes with these sort of like aesthetic astrologers and
I was going to say
websites.
what people don't recognize is that to have the slick anything is super expensive. And what that means is it has to be corporate and it has to be pop. So
Mhm.
if you don't want to have a homogenized pop, product, then you can't be slick. mean, it's just one of those things. This is not possible to do that. The production values cannot be done unless it's expensive. And if it's going to be expensive, it has to be popular. And so you're not going to get any kind of, it's just, like I said, that, you know, the requirement of it has to be up to the minute, you know, and slick and everything and cool. It's nice. I appreciate that stuff too. But it's
Mhm.
like, it's not something, I mean, I do videos just like this. It's just talking head videos because it's just
Mhm.
like, because I was doing editing for a while. I mean, I have my early videos have like 150,000 views, but it took me an hour. It would take me like, you know, like a 30-minute video would take me like 10 hours to do
It's too
because I'm
much.
doing
And
all this cutting and panning and, you know, the sound, you know, I'm doing all this stuff and it's not even at a super high level, but just to be putting together all the pieces of it like that, it's incredibly time consuming. And it's like, it just doesn't, part of the thing, like, for example, with the business is like, I have this jeweler who does the talismans for me. He's in Pakistan and he's a student of mine, but he's super knowledgeable about Sufi stuff and all the Islamic magic and everything like that. He does these amazing Islamic talismans, which I'm really into. And but he and I are it. I mean, it's like a fair trade situation. He gets paid a huge amount of money, you know, compared to what you would do for in a corporate situation. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Because he's my partner basically.
Yeah.
But we don't do wholesale. We don't anything like, because he was like, "Well, you're wholesaling." I'm like, you can't do wholesale with this
No.
stuff. You know, it's just like
No.
there's too many people trying to make money off of it. And
Mhm.
then, you know, with wholesale, then people make these extravagant promises, and then the customer comes to me and expects me to do customer service with it. And
Yeah,
I'm like,
no
again, that
wholesale.
wasn't it was just never something that was going to work for, they're not products. That's the thing that people don't get
Yes.
about talismans. I get a lot of people saying, "Well, do you have it in the gold finish or the bronze on the back with the this stuff?" And I'm like, it's like a rosary. Like you don't, I've seen Catholic stuff saying, do not get carried away with expensive rosaries and expensive jewelry because this is a spiritual thing, right?
Mhm.
It's not, it's nice that it's beautiful, but if you get totally focused on the appearance of it or the materials, you're missing the point of, because it's incredibly difficult to get the elections. I mean, that's the thing too. I mean, these are like, I look out for a year and get the absolute best time. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, we had a year or two we couldn't do Mercury talismans. There was
Uh-huh.
not a good enough election that was worth doing as far as I was concerned. So
Yeah.
that's really what the key of it is. And it's nice that they're beautiful and everything like that. But if you get so focused on the appearance of it, then you know what I mean? It misses the point, the overall point of it, that these are these incredibly powerful conduits or windows to interact with that particular spirit. And
They are, and let me say, I have so many stories from people that I know who have worked with or received your talismanic work, including myself, and had just like instant results. So if you are on the fence or if you've never tried a talisman, try
or it might
one.
not have instant results. That's just what this is
No,
another
no,
thing I would say about
you can't
talismans.
advertise it. You don't need to advertise it. I'm just saying from my experience in the
Yeah.
community, people have had really beautiful interactions, results, magical moments, epiphanies spiritually by bringing in some of these sacred items into their
Sure. I mean,
lives.
this is what I would say about it is a lot. The devotional approach gets you the best because what you
Yeah.
do is you say, I'm going to be open to whatever may happen, right? And I'm going to be open to what the possibilities are with this, but I'm not going to be disappointed if nothing obvious happens. But what I'm going to do is just be an openness
Mhm.
because I have to do a lot of screening of people and a lot of lowering of expectations from the Harry Potter thing, you know? And
Yeah.
it's like, and that's why I keep the prices at the level that I do, because, you know, part of it is there's this whole thing of like, well, let's do solid gold. I mean, whatever that is. I mean, I guess, I guess they're talking about 18 karat gold and do gemstones and stuff. And then they can do two talismans and they cost $10,000.
Yeah.
And there's
Mhm.
a lot of people out doing that, which is fine. But I sort of feel like it's nice for people to access it at a more reasonable price. So that's why I have kind of a cap on the price and also the expectation. Because if you spend $300, okay, if I spend 3,000, I kind of have an implicit expectation that this is going to be really amazing no matter what.
And
And it
again, those
might not
expectations.
happen.
Yeah, and those expectations, I think, come with that worldview we were talking about. That's maybe less of our particular worldview or approach, where if you're coming from a spirited sort of animistic approach, you're developing a relationship and you're not expecting the thing to work for you and produce or something,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I
It's
mean,
that kind of,
it's like a rosary, right? You go online, you get this really beautiful rosary, and you're really happy to have the rosary because it's so beautiful. But then you use it to pray with. right? It's a mechanism for basically assisting you in that spiritual and it's not all about the rosary. It's really more to contact, Mary or whatever saint or whatever you're dealing with. And that's what I
Yeah.
say about the talismans, is that it's like having the cell phone number of the spirit. And the magic to me is not in the talisman, right? It's that it's like it's use a method of contact, and the relationship and developing that relationship but it makes it very easy to get in contact. I mean, it's immediately a way gives that strong, powerful connection. And so, I mean, that's what I think they're cool. I mean, this is what's funny is, like, if I came across my website now, I'd be like, wow, this is so cool. Because that's all I ever did. I just did a bunch of stuff that I was interested in, and I've just been blessed to be able to find that so many, I mean, just like you, this reaction is so positive. It's like, this is a real blessing for me that the stuff that I thought was cool, that it's shared by anybody at all. Now, at the same time, I remember my parents, when I was a kid, they just thought I was so boring. Like, everything I was into, they were just like, oh God, this is so ridiculous. So I have had that kind of like sense of things. And it's really kind of great for me, like I said, to get out and to get in touch with people that affirm the stuff that I do, because it's not mainstream. And if you're not a mainstream person, if you're doing your own thing, I mean, I've been very counterculture my whole life. And it's like, I have this sort of, not famous, but I have this sort of metaphor that I like to use. It's like talking about people. And I talk about people being like a domesticated animal or a rat or a duck. And so the average person, they have a job, right? And they do what they're told. And the boss tells them where to sit and where to go and what to do. But it's safe. They get taken care of, right? And so that's the sort of lifestyle that's put out for you, the conventional middle-class lifestyle, is that you do what you're told, get a job, do this thing and follow. But the alternative, the official alternative, is the rat, which is the criminal, right? And you're dangerous and you're outside of society, but you're a kind of an unpleasant person, we lived in this is where this comes from. We lived in this apartment in Washington, D.C. And like I said, there was people, domesticated animals, and there's rats running around. And then there were these ducks, these mallard ducks that nested there, and we took care of them. And the cool thing about the mallard, because people say, oh, they're your pets. I'm like, no, they're wild mallards. They just needed our help. Like, they would have fountain, we'd clean the fountain out for them. We supplemented their food and stuff. And then they flew off. And like, that's what I want to be. I want to be interacting with the society in a positive way. No one's thinking badly of me, but I want to be wild too, but not wild like a rat. You know what I mean? The ducks are wild in a very positive way. No, not scaring anybody, messing anybody up, or causing any problems, but they're able to interact with society. So that's kind of my goal, is to be counterculture in such a way that I'm not a rebel. I'm not a rebel, because a rebel is controlled by the thing that they're rebelling against, because they always have to go against it. And
they're in a polarity to something else. They're not jumping off
into their own thing, right?
Yeah.
And there's plenty about society that I like, and I need to interact with them to like make a living and get my Amazon stuff or whatever. I mean, there's plenty of stuff where I have to do that. But it's like, nevertheless, the magical stuff I think can be part of, and it's very attractive to people because it's super counterculture. Because we have a culture that's super atheistic, materialistic. So to be serious about it, to be open to it. So she's talking about animism. My wife is naturally animistic. She always was. She helped me a lot. And that's where I'm at now. Everything is alive, and not just living things.
Me too. I was a weird, my mom was like, you were born like this and we don't know how you got that way. For me, the worldview, the worldview and approach was like, always foreign to me, that atheistic materialism. I was born animistic, and it was very difficult at first to figure out if I'm the rebel or if I'm you know what I'm saying? Like, that being outed at first, you kind of feel like you're counter to something else. But yeah, some people, like your wife, maybe it's like, I felt always truly animistic. So when I found your approach, and when I found astrology and felt the life in it, and it giving expression to absolutely everything around me, it was very beautiful and validating. Well, it is like finding a good friend. Or
today, like I said, the power line guys came through and were trimming trees, and I was bummed because they hurt the tree, and they trimmed it more than they needed to. And then they dropped a whole bunch of branches on my flowers, and I was just like, I was so mad about it, and partly it's because they made a mess, and I hate contractors. I mean, because of that kind of stuff. They're the only thing worse than a contractor is a lawyer. But the but there's a sense they're alive. You know what I mean? That's the thing is like, they were putting in this gas line about 2 years ago, and they dug up the roots of my tree, and I was so mad. I went
Mm-hmm.
out and told them off about that because it's like the trees are just so um alive, and like the stuff and then they're forced, they're communicating with each other. They have this all the neurochemicals and all this sort of stuff. I'm just like, of course, because
I
it's
was just gonna
all
bring that up. Like I
all
listened to,
alive,
yeah,
you
those
know.
podcasts where they talk about like how the mycelium are sending
Yeah,
messages.
right,
If one
exactly.
tree is sick, they'll send a message.
If you think about an say ants, right? What's the individual? Because we tell, oh, the ant. I'm like, no, the hive is the individual,
Mm,
right? The hives will live for like 10 or 15 years,
mm.
right? That's the individual. It's like a city, right? A city's made up of individual. I mean, I'm the person. I'm like, no, you're just, it's like a holon. Do you know what a holon is?
Oh, hold on.
Yeah, HOLON. Holon is a sort of theory of this conceptual way of looking at things. So everything is a whole
Okay.
that's part of another whole,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah.
So you
Okay.
think of like a people are, made up of cells, right? But you're
Hmm.
also part of the country or part of the city. So
Hmm.
that's like unity in itself. And you see, I'm saying, depending on which perspective of looking at things. So it's constant whole and part, interactive stuff. And
Absolutely.
but it's funny because when I was a kid, plants didn't seem alive to me.
Hmm.
Now that I started gardening, which has led to late because I have a house. I mean, I didn't get a house till I was really old. And like this gardening is like it's a trip because they're
Yeah,
so alive.
they are.
I have these plants, it's called purslane, and it opens in the daytime in the sunshine and closes at night. And it's like, wow, it's so sentient. But even to me, like a rock is sentient. I mean, we have this Shinto, we have this big rock in our yard. I have what's called a shiminawa, which is this like rope. I don't know if you're seeing Japanese. They put it around any sacred object, particularly like trees and rocks and stuff. So I have a shiminawa around my rock. And it's like that's the genius loci of the neighborhood. I mean, it's like that's the guardian spirit of the neighborhood. And it's like, and but that's just like the Shinto stuff is very cool because they never gave up their basic religion, their basic spirituality.
Mhm.
And it's no sacrifice. The blood is polluting in that. So they have never have any death or anything in that at all, no sacrifice whatsoever. And
Mhm.
everything's alive. And like stuff like a Japanese extermination company will go to a Shinto temple once a year to give offerings for the bugs they killed
It's so
because they're
cool.
feeling sorry about the bugs, you
Hmm.
know? And it's
Yep.
so at odds with the modern thing is like, timber, like timber, like resources,
I
and that
can't
kind of thing is
stand
like,
producing
yeah,
commodification.
yeah,
Like,
that kind of
oh my
stuff
God.
is just like freaky, you know what I mean? And it's like, because, but the thing about it is that industrial civilization has a very short shelf life.
Oh, and we're
It's like we're in the terminal stages of it. And it's like, and, but nevertheless, the planet, if you think of the end Permian extinction, do you know about that?
maybe.
End Permian extinction is like 500 million years ago, 600 million years ago. And what
Okay.
happened was in Siberia, this is the hypothesis, they had a lot of volcanic eruptions, right? Like huge amount, like half the size of the United States erupting at once, right? From the, continental drift and everything. And
Mhm.
this happened to go through a strata of coal and petroleum.
Okay.
So it produced a tremendous amount of smoke and pollution. It's just like we're doing right now. And then also volcanic activity like sulfur dioxide. So you have acidification of the water and the air, right? You've got the everything's, and then you have runaway greenhouse effect.
Yeah.
So massive die-off. It took the planet about 20 or 30 million years to recover because it has homeostatic mechanisms. You know what I mean? That the temperature was
Mhm.
off and it took, so that's what's going to happen with us. I mean, humans are not unnatural. This is a natural process that's going on. And it's necessary to have Picatrix and internet, and put people physically on the moon. I mean, it's just one of those things they thought, you know what? Let's get crazy. Let's do this. And then we'll have a massive die off and we'll give it another shot for another 30 million years. I mean, I don't know what we have intelligent rats or whatever, bugs or whatever the next iteration is, but this is the end of, but it's an autumn period. I mean, autumn's beautiful, but that's what we're dealing with is this
Autumn is
incredible
beautiful.
efflorescence in the twilight zone period. And it's like, because obviously the planet cannot support billions of humans.
Yeah.
It's just not, the agriculture was the big mistake. That was the big,
So
had we
hardcore.
stuck
Yeah.
with the hunter gatherer. And I've seen that people say like, that Unabomber, he was like, oh, it's better. I'm like, it's not better to be a hunter and gatherer. This is better. I got air conditioning, I got internet. It's awesome. I'm like a diva. The diva realm. You know what
Yeah.
that is? This is
Ava or
diva.
Diva.
this is a diva realm. I
Mhm.
mean, Netflix, I can watch any movie I want, no ads, watch it anytime I want. I have any information I want to have access to, any music I want. If I want to order something on Amazon, I can have it in 2 days. I mean, this is the diva realm, but it just can't last. And
Yeah.
so, it's a more like the Aboriginal civilization, not civilization, but Aboriginal culture in Australia was stable for 50,000 years till the Europeans showed up.
Yeah.
And you can get stable at a hunter-gatherer level because it's
Mhm.
destructive. I mean, so humans do have a tendency to kind of wipe stuff out, but that is at a low enough technological level and a low enough level of population that it wasn't devastating. Whereas now it's just like, you know, it's, but I'm not doing anything about it. I'm running my air conditioner.
Yeah. Well,
It's sort of like what we're trapped in this thing, and it's sort of like, but whatever. I mean, we're gonna do Picatrix. I mean, we're gonna do it. We're gonna do our thing. We're gonna freak freely. We're gonna be as beautiful as we can and fully actualize ourselves. And
exactly.
if you're
Yeah.
gonna do it, if you're the kind of person like us that's attracted to this, you're like one in a million anyway.
Mhm.
So if you're serious about it, go for it. Do your thing. That's what your function is. Be as crazy as you can. And it's, I think, a really, because it's all good. I mean, mass destruction is all good, for the Dharma Dhatu, for consciousness, like it's all interesting, you know, and it's, um, which isn't to say that for a human being you should go do evil stuff because it's going to come with a bad karma for you.
No.
This is one
In
of those things. But if we take the perspective of stepping away from the I and we can and adopt the universal perspective, then we're recognizing that. It's like my wife was saying to me. She's like, just says, I see you're in great bliss, which is Ramakrishna. He was all cranky and someone came up to him and said that. And he's like, oh, you caught me out, you rascal. Because it's reminding us of our true nature, right?
Mhm.
And our true nature is self-aware consciousness, and not differentiated into this individual body, but universal consciousness. And
Yeah.
it's like, which, like I said, it's all grist to the mill for universal consciousness.
Mhm.
Insofar as we see ourselves as an individual person, then we want to be positive if we can. I mean, if you're I'm a right hand path person. That's what I say. If I was a left hand person, I'd be doing. I ran into this guy. He was really interesting. He was into this Luciferian anti-cosmic stuff. Do you know what that is? It's Kabbalistic, but it's like Luciferian.
Yeah, I've heard fringes of it in the occult
Yeah.
circles,
So
but
he was into this whole Kabbalistic kind of like the Qliphoth. You know what the Qliphoth are? When the Sephiroth manifested, it was
uh-huh.
too much. The total glory of God was too much for it, and they shattered. And so they're
Uh-huh.
these shattered sort of realities. And that's where
Well,
like the demons and stuff and all that come out of the Qliphoth. But
uh-huh.
he was funny because he was taking a left-hand path, evil approach to wisdom. And that's why he would call me up and talk to me. And it was bizarre because I would get a sinus attack and he would get all, I mean, our energies, our polarities were so off. And but it's certainly possible. I mean, it's a little odd to be into evil, but you know, wanting wisdom, but it's all possible. So
Yeah.
it's like, but I like the right hand path. But that's
Yeah.
my personality. Like I said, it
Mhm.
was this thing. It's like the older I get, the more I'm like so firmly seated in that it's like, um, that's where I'm coming from. But again, it's you got to be who you are. Like we have a cat, and he's so lucky because he lived in the neighborhood before. He was in the Zen Center. We had a Zen Center. He lived in the Zen Center before we knew him, and he met us before his owner died suddenly, and then he just moved in with us. And he's
Mhm.
the boss cat. He's the alpha male in the neighborhood. He gets to go out whenever he wants. He's got this beautiful neighborhood, and it's like he gets to fully actualize his catness, you
Yes.
know? And it's like it's a shame like to have a hawk in a cage. And the same thing with people too. It's like I have been blessed by being able to actualize my weirdness, to be freak freely as fully as possible. And it's like I would wish that upon everybody, I guess, because it's sad that people just get stuck. You know what I mean? If you get stuck in this, like to me, like the suburban thing with a job and a car and driving to work and a job you hate, and you're going to retire. It's just like I look at like I grew up in a suburb and it was awful. I'm like, you can't if you want to get a pint of milk, you have to get in a car and drive somewhere. It's like you can't do anything. And it's like, you know what Sim City is? You heard of that? It's like,
Uh-huh.
oh, I started playing it again. And it was funny because I'm like, my Sim City is like I was walking around in my neighborhood going, this is weird. It was tripping me out because I was like, I've been looking at these city things, but I'm like, I design a city that I like to live in, which is like the housing is next to the commercial stuff. I mean, everything's right. You can just walk to everything.
Walking distance
Yeah.
cities.
My
Yeah.
city, though I live in Iowa City, was founded in like 18 whatever 30. It's really, really old. And my neighborhood is the oldest neighborhood out. There was the first neighborhood plotted after the original plot, like 1856. So it's laid out in an 1856 level. And my house is over 100 years old, which is
Same
crazy
with the
for
one I'm
for
in.
Midwest. For the
Hmm.
Midwest, it's just nutty. But the
Hmm.
beautiful thing about it is it's human scale and I can walk all over the place.
Yeah,
So it's
that's
like that I really like. And it's like I just feel like people are trapped in this because I know people are like they want the apocalypse to come so they don't have to go to work.
people. Oh my God.
You know
I
what I
know.
mean? This is like,
Uh-huh.
oh my God.
I
And it's
do.
sort of like, I mean, like, what a soulless existence. But it was a long journey for me to break out from just to come back. This is sort of a wrap up. When I talk about me being, I came from the suburban background, right? To this, right? And so it's a long road, right? But I would say to those people that is, if that's your thing, go for it. You know what I mean? And I
Absolutely.
think that there's the astrology and magic is a really nice method to do that because it's accessible to us. We have teachers that can follow. We have lots of information. We can actually follow that path. And
Mhm.
it's like, which isn't to say there's like not 10,000 other things you can do. I mean, we're living in an incredible time when all this stuff is so easily available to us. And so
And
if you want to do
there's so many
Kashmiri
choices.
Shaivism or Advaita Vedanta or modern
Uh-huh.
non-dual or, Bhakti, there's a million types of Bhakti stuff. I mean, just whatever. And so, I think that we're really blessed as well, best of times, worst of times. But that's what I would say about it is ultimately, I think that it's sad to see people so trapped, you know, and you don't have to be.
Yeah,
But at
for
the same
you.
time, you don't have to be a rebel either. It's like this whole like violence thing. I'm like, I was watching a movie on the Baader Meinhof group. You know who they are, the Red Army faction.
Yes, I do. Hmm.
And so I watched it. Then I just kind of like was so sad because they were so idealistic
Hmm.
and they got trapped into violence
Hmm.
and they were treated violently, so they reacted violently. And I'm like, oh, just because you
I know.
can't overcome the state. The state is so much better at being violent than you are, and then
Uh-huh.
you alienate, you lose any support. You know?
Uh-huh.
And it's the same that Martin Luther King, like, oh, Martin Luther King, he's bullshit. He didn't. I mean, he got a long way. He was extremely successful. As probably as successful as anyone could ever be with any methodology as far as civil rights. You know, I'm just talking about effectiveness. And it's just
Hmm.
like violence. I did a video on this about magical conflict strategies, and
Hmm.
talking about, you know, using protection magic versus peace and reconciliation magic and aggression. And I'm like, I don't do aggression, but I said, it's usually the sort of like I pull a knife, you pull a gun. You know what I mean? It ends up in this escalation stuff, and people figure, oh, I'll use violence and beat the other person into submission. And it's like, but you wouldn't react to violence that way. So why would they? It just seems like I'm not against violence if it works, but it doesn't usually work. And that's
Hmm.
the problem with that sort of thing is like,
It's
you know,
also the problem with putting yourself on the polarity of like, oh, I'm Christian, now I'm non-Christian or whatever. It's kind of like the rat or the whatever, be the duck,
yeah,
like be as
be the
like
duck.
free.
Yeah, exactly.
Be the duck.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing too, is to step out of that whole thing. It's like,
Uh-huh.
if you don't like this whole union thing, I'm like, I don't need a union because I don't have a job. I haven't had a job for 30 years, you know? All I have is hobbies that pay well. If you're
It's so cool.
creative and practical, then you can do your own thing and you can make a living doing your thing. And it's just like, you know, I think and I see people like, can I use astrology for cryptocurrency? I'm like, you just get out of here. You know what I mean? It's just like, I've never been able to do it. But the other thing, I'm like, why do you want to be a parasite? You
Yeah,
know?
well, the
It's like
financial
all that
astrology
stuff is
stuff,
so parasitic, you know,
it's
stock
never had
market,
an interest for me.
all that garbage stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, I get Bloomberg, so I look at all that stuff, and all that stuff is just like, it's the whole like, did you ever see that movie, The Big Short, that was all about the housing crisis?
I
You know?
did, but I didn't finish it. But yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, basically, it's all this just financial manipulation. It's just all a
Uh-huh.
big it's a casino. It's like people talk about investments. I'm like, this is a con. It's like,
Hmm.
why do you want to be spending your time with it? Why don't you find something you think is fun to do and interesting and helps people, and then figure out a way to make money doing it?
Hmm.
If you want to do something, it needs to be self-supporting, and people need to pay you, be willing to give you something in exchange for what you're doing. And that's another thing too. Like the legal stuff I do, I've been able to do an amazing stuff in my state. I've had 5 cases in our Supreme Court. I make all sorts of precedent and law in my area. And it's like, because I'm not getting funded by anybody, I don't have a job. And I took cases in such a way that weren't expensive, because I couldn't afford it. I had a case that, like a class action that I did, it cost me $500 because I didn't choose to have that trench warfare expensive style of approach. I'm like, here's my resources. The other thing I did with the legal stuff that's very interesting is, like, I don't do stuff based on what I want to happen. I do stuff based on what's possible. So I look and say, what can it be accomplished, right? Because there's plenty of good stuff to do, So it's what is worthwhile, Venn diagram, what is accomplishable, and what's the overlap. But just like, oh, world peace, I'm like, I don't think you're going to be able to accomplish that. How about something a little more practical, right? There's
How about being peaceful with inside of your relationships or something?
Yeah, or just like, yeah, but I mean that there's an individual, but I'm talking about I'm doing collective action. I'm Aquarian. Right. And so I did court cases, like I said, if I take a court case up to the Iowa Supreme Court and they rule in our favor, that makes law for the entire state. I mean, I'm affecting every single landlord-tenant. I'm doing landlord-tenant law. I'm expecting it's, everybody in the state. And so that's where I leverage my effort. You know what I mean? And so that was my focus, was this basically social engineering. But a lot of it is appealing to, like, for example, I'm not a tenant activist. I represent landlords and tenants. And I'm interested in making that relationship work as well as it can within the confines. Not that I necessarily think it's a great idea because it's in capitalism, but that's what we got. So it's like, there's a person named Temple Grandin. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. She's high functioning autistic, loves animals. So what she ended up doing was designing slaughterhouses. You're like, what? She loves animals. But she said, I want to make it less painful for them. Why should they suffer so much? I can make it reduce the suffering as much as possible. Now I could see how someone would say, I don't want anything to do with it, but that's kind of my function in the legal system, is like, I want to make it work as well as possible for people. You know what I mean? Which is a horrible situation for a lot of people, but let's make it run as efficiently and fairly as we can within the confines of what we got. And so that's where I'm really at odds with the revolutionary stuff, because they just want to blow things up. And then what results ends up screwing over the weak anyway. It's just like, doesn't change anything. Communism never helped people. It just ended up with this same power structure and same oppression on even a worse level in a lot of cases. So the capitalism sucks, but it's like, since that's what we got, how can we work within that? So that's what I was saying, is that this is beyond just, because I think on a personal level, it's very important to be a good person. I mean, you can make a huge impact on your life and everybody in you just by doing the right thing. But even on a collective social action, that's where people just can't seem to. There actually are collective ways of dealing with stuff, right? But you have to be very, you have to work within the whole confines of what's possible. But if you have an open mind about it, you can accomplish. See, I don't see much difference between being an astrologer and being a lawyer. That's another thing people think.
I was kind of weird. Like, as you're telling
this, they're exactly the same thing to me. That I have this body of knowledge, practical knowledge, that's also, there's a constant going back between theory and practice in both of these.
Yes.
You have to be able to understand the theory to be able to make a change. Because if you only do practice, you're stuck with what everybody does. But if you're just theory, you can't put it into action. So you have to be able to do this simultaneous kind of very liminal hermetic sort of thing. But what I'm saying is, I couldn't participate in any higher level in the power structure, as an official or anything. Now, what I can do though, like, for example, I'm telling you, I'm writing this book. This book is, it's really giving my philosophy. It's giving a methodology, right? Based on natural law. Okay. Now, natural law is very discredited as a philosophy in law because it's spiritually based. It's the idea that law is not made, it's discovered. Whereas the view of law now is that you just figure out who the boss is and you have to do whatever they say. And so it's a very tyrannical, very like I said, very nihilist approach. And so, but just putting it out there saying, look, justice is important and here's a logical way to do justice. It's going to have that kind of same as Picatrix. You know what I mean? It's that underlying stuff. It's like, if you can change how people think, if you can change people's models, and if you change people's worldview, then you have an incredible. So I'm a revolutionary in the sense of what I want to do is change how people relate to reality.
Yes.
So that is, but not in a violent way, not in a forceful way, but in a way that is in tune with what people already feel and think. And so that's what I would say the message ultimately of everything in my life kind of revolves around that, which is like, and it's like the Zen, it's a pointing.
Yeah.
Everything I've always ever done is a pointing, right? And that's, and then if you have ears, let them hear, and some people can hear me and some people can't hear me. And that's cool either way.
Well, we hear you and we
I can see.
appreciate your work. Thank you. Or I'll speak for myself. I appreciate your work and thank you for coming here today. Thank you for sharing all your messages with us. They're not falling on deaf ears, I think. So thank you for
That's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you for having us as your students. Thank you for all the students you've trained. Thank you for putting out the bodies of work that you have and will continue to do. Yeah, you've been an inspiration to me. I know you've been an inspiration to many other people in the field. And it was a complete and true honor to connect with you today. So come back anytime. I'll keep in touch with you, but anytime you're always welcome in this space. If you have any messages you need to shout from the rooftops.
Well, it's very gratifying that you get it on so many levels, because that's what I feel like. See, I'm dealing with, I was saying it's like Stephen Hawking and having somebody, like every day someone calls him up and says 1 + 1 is 3. And he's like, no, it is. It's 1 + 1 is 2. And they're like, you're an idiot. And I'm going to go tell everybody else what an idiot you are because you don't think 1 + 1 is 3. And I'm just like, because I get so many beginner stuff and everyone's so already knows everything and has these weird assumptions. At the same time, it's hard to see the influence. You know what I mean? So the fact that I'm having a positive influence, I mean, no one does what you just did. I mean, I occasionally get people saying thank you or whatever, but nobody's on the level that they're really deeply getting it. You know what I mean? It happens, like I said, once every couple months, I might get that, because it's just like that understanding of that level is rare, right? And then for it to click with people is rare too. So it's really that, it's funny because I did an I Ching for today, because sometimes I like just, what's the current situation? And I got 27, which is nourishment. And it's like, yep. So that's what I got. You're giving me a lot of spiritual nourishment. So I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm giving it back really because you've given it to us. So thank you.
Here's the secret. And I'll let you go after this. The secret to causality is that there is no causality because everything is one. Right. And so like, I think about like a dream, right? You have a dream and you're standing on the hill and a bottle rolls down the hill and it smashes. Is there a hill and a bottle and it's getting smashed? No, it's a dream, right? The unity is in the consciousness. And the dreamer, though, is just a character. Like you have dream characters in the dream. Are those real people? No, that's a dream character. The I is a dream character too. So this is the ultimate secret of it, is that there is no causality because nothing is separate and nothing's really physically real either. So that, if that infuses your consciousness, then it's like, then the stuff starts to be like, because otherwise it's keep talking about energy. It's like, not really, not in a platonic, not a Neoplatonic or Hermetic. It's not energy, right?
Yeah.
Like occult virtue, right? As you have everything is one in the one, and then they separate into the archetypes and the intelligences, right? And then the seminal virtues, of all things in the world soul, right? And then there's occult virtue through the planets, and then each thing, right? But the things that the planet rules are not separate from the planet. They're all the same. They're all unified. They never have been separate.
Yeah.
But they're connected through this hidden sympathy, right?
Right.
But they're not really connected because they're not really separate.
Yeah, exactly.
There is no causality.
Oh, I love that.
So that's really the secret, but that's if you're in a world of individual things, then there has to be some kind of causality. But another positive, like I said, you could do causality that's based on it, like a clock. I mean, that's internal causality. It's not external. You don't need energy for a clock. It just gives you the time because that's what it does.
Yeah.
So there's that too. But that's also part of like a hawk. I mean, a hawk flies because it's a hawk, not because there's any external force on it. But it's dependent arising. You don't know what dependent arising?
Yes.
Everything arises together. All this apparent separate things are all unified.
Yeah.
So I'll leave you with that. You can play with those. A lot of stuff to think about.
And thank you for like giving me personal like juice and
you are ready.
Thank
right?
You.
So you get it.
I'm
right? Because I'm really open to that, as long as like if people like really are like ready for it, but there's not too many people that I can talk to about this stuff. Super advanced. So you have done a lot of stuff already. So that shows you're like, you got a very serious approach. I had a very enjoyable time. So it's good.
Well, Christopher, thank you so much again for being here. You can find Christopher's work on renaissanceastrology.com. And then also you have a YouTube channel here. Can you tell us, is it Renaissance Astrology?
Renaissance Astrology, yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. And everything will be linked in the comments below. Make sure to check out all of Chris's amazing work, his publications, his course, his talismans. Feel free to write in the comments below any questions that you might have. Reach out to me or Christopher with any pertinent questions, of course. So thank you and blessings to you, Christopher, and blessings to everyone tuning in. And until next time, ciao.
Mata okaka bersama yo demikian soba da soba kena mata iba nak kau mati mawa demikian soba dan soba ate iba nak ujuna baikana kamaya tak ongai esa Your Majesty, Matari Bekana Sabaso, in the Kina, to Bine, to you guys, in by it, with the bike,